Welcome back to the Developer's Diary. I'm Global War 36 enthusiast, and joining me again today is the lead designer for Global War 36, Morten Monk. Welcome back, Morten.
Thanks, Peter. It's good to be back.
Well, today we're going to be talking technology. It's one of the most fun parts of the game. Tech has a huge impact on the game, and I really love, even in V3, I loved Global War's tech system. It's multi-stage, requiring you to uh, invest 4 to 6 years to develop a tech. I've seen so much drama around tech roles in prior games. You know, whether a person will develop long-range aircraft that turn, or they'll get improved construction. It was a really great system in V3. So, what were some of your considerations in evolving from V3 to V4 as far as technology?
I thought, I think that overall there were one big problem with the technology, and that being that there was too much of it in the game,
Mm,
especially for the US player. They always ended up with more or less everything, which made technology just it wasn't important for them.
right, it loses its value if you get everything. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So there were too much technology, so we wanted to reduce that a bit. And the other thing was that we wanted to broaden each player's um, appetite for tech.
Choices.
So typically a nation has a couple of tier one techs and perhaps a couple of tier twos, and then the rest are irrelevant.
Hmm.
So we wanted to bring more options to the table, so that no matter how lucky you were, you wouldn't get everything you wanted.
Hmm.
So and you can say that the strategic bombing change we did is also primarily for tech. So strategic bombing was heavily underutilized in V3. So you can say that we wanted to make strategic bombing great again.
Right.
Um,
And what an
so
easy fix for strategic bombing. All you had to do was say that repairs don't occur until the end of the turn. It wasn't a complicated rule, it just made the damage stick, and the person actually felt the pain of the damage rather than just losing some IPP from it. So, it took away tech rolls.
actually, I think that most great fixes are simple.
Hmm.
Every time I end up with a long, where I have to write a long sentence explaining with caveats and exceptions, I'm usually going down the wrong rabbit hole. So
Hmm.
simple is always best. So
Yeah.
yeah, so
Well, if you think about technology in World War II, I mean, you'd be hard pressed to argue that uh, the most important technological advancement was atomic weapons. So, why does global war not have atomic weapons in its technology tree?
oh, that's a good question. Um, well, I actually wanted to bring it in. Um, so we we tested several ways of bringing nukes into the mix, and none of them worked. Well, some of them worked, but none of them were actually fun to play. Um, so it typically always ended up with a very, very decisive, do you get the nukes or not? So we we previously talked about the big problem with having all your fleets
Mm,
amassing together, and then we have one decisive battle
right.
that decides the fate of the Pacific or the Med. Um, the nuke issue actually brought this to a whole new level because so let's say that, for example, we introduce nukes on the tech tree as it takes 10 or above to get
Hmm.
the tech. That's simple, right? So you will just roll for it every turn.
Right.
And the games that you get it,
You
you
win.
win.
Yep.
So that was not fun.
Hmm.
So then we tried, well, let's have economic, some economic price behind the nukes and say, well, you need some sort of certain facilities, you need some resources. Where are those resources located? And the problem with that is that it's very, very pro-allied because resources in Africa, well, Russia
Easy to
is not gonna,
secure.
yeah, Russia is not gonna go there anytime soon. And you have the USA has all the money, right? So they have the ability to pay 30 or 40 or 50 IPP to get a selection of whatever facilities we wanted to bring in. So that wasn't fun either. And then we also tried a variant of the East versus West, where that's also partly economical, but where the nations begin with some of these facilities so that they don't have to spend IPP on it. Then you get the nukes, but then what? How do you get them into action? Do you transport them on planes, or do you have a virtual set of nukes in the corner of the map, and then you can deploy them? But then things started to get complicated. But because, well, if you drop a nuke on, let's say, Tokyo, do we then want to bring morale into the picture? Can you force a nation to surrender? So all of these were simply not fun,
Right.
because it took away the focus and the enjoyment of the conventional warfare. So then we also tried a new thing. We said, well, the Allies is going to get the bomb. They're going to get the technology in 45. So if the Russians or Axis has not won by 45, the Allies win. So if we go back to our talk last time about the victory conditions,
Variable turn ending.
strategic objectives, we then had, okay, well, let's say that the Axis, they have to score 10 or 11 or 12 points. If they do that before 45, they win. Comintern, they have to score 4, 5, 6 points before 45. And if they do that, they win. And if they haven't done that, the Allies would win. On paper, that seems simple. It couldn't even be fun, right? Because now you have a race against the clock on a different scale. But when we tried that, we actually ran into a lot of the issues that we wanted to avoid with the variable ending, because we've had several games where Axis won in 41, and they were so extremely stretched, and they bet so much, and there were absolutely no air force left. They were totally wasted, but they had the points, so they won the game.
Right.
So that was one problem. And the other problem was that, well, the Allies, they're always under pressure for the first half of the game. So during the reverse, where you just have to score a certain amount, was simply not fun for the Allies. So it was like they showed up for a beating every time, and they didn't get to enjoy the fun of scoring points and doing stuff, because it was always just a matter of how much beating were you going to get this time.
It
So
took the
that also
focus
went
away
out.
from the whole everything we've been playing all until
Yeah,
44, 45 didn't matter at all. It was all about what happened with atomic weapon development.
yeah. So we actually
Just dropped
came to
it.
the conclusion that, well, it's not for the base game, and if people want to have nukes, they will have to be introduced via expansions or some other means.
It's
So
funny
yeah,
because conceptually, I think the variable turn ending is the nuke development. So if the Allies win the game because of the variable turn end, that means they developed the nuke and dropped, on Japan. If the Axis wins, it means the Americans' first explosion ended up killing the scientists. I mean, it was a complete debacle. And if the Comintern wins, it means their spies infiltrated the whole thing, sabotaged it, but got the technology themselves. So I feel like the variable turn ending is the game ends because of something to do with nuclear development, and it's not so much who developed it first or who spent the most money, but that's why the game ended, having to do with the nukes. Anyway, that's a little side thing.
and you can actually also argue that, well, the strategic objective for the American technology supremacy, that is more or less a mini
Mm-hmm.
version of the nuke, is it not?
Right.
So you sort of
Yeah,
like
think about it
have
that way.
you it is a way of thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't get the nukes, but you get a point for
Right.
being ahead on tech.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a poor man's representation of nukes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about another interesting thing that you did. It used to be that in version 3 you could lend-lease technological units, and the classic thing would be USA sending jets. Um, but now you can't do that, but you can build your own advanced technology units as long as they're not nation-specific units. You can build units like advanced mechanized infantry outside of home country. You'd still have to build, if you're Germany, you'd have to build your SS Panzer Grenadiers in home country. So tell me about those two changes about not lend-leasing tech and building outside home country.
The removal of lend-leasing was it was a major problem in version 3, especially the Free France uh, more or less had only jet fighters and heavy strategic bombers and a
Mm-hmm.
couple of heavy armors. Um, so every turn the Americans would just lend lease these incredibly expensive weapons to Free France or KMT, because that is the most efficient way of getting your IPP into doing
Action.
damage on your
Mm-hmm.
enemies, what I call IPP velocity. But it was not historical. Um, we wanted to eliminate this behavior. Um, and then on a side note, we then enabled nations to build them outside of home country, which is more historical and not intrusive in the game mechanics
Mm-hmm.
as your other issue.
Right. Okay, before we start talking about each individual technology, I think it would be good to say what happened to one of the technologies that got removed. I know that Hambone was very upset about wartime economy being eliminated. Can you convince him that you had good reason to do so?
Wartime economy. Yeah, I think Hambone is probably one of the few players to actually miss this tech. Um, the problem with the tech is that it is actually not a tech. It's it's
Mm.
uh, it's not technology. It's a way of politically structuring your economy.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing. But on a more basic level, gameplay wise, all nations had this as a tier one tech. So everyone went for it as their number one tech. So you could actually say that, for example, Italy didn't have a problem choosing any tech at all because they just went for wartime economy. And they would typically not get any other tech unless they were very lucky. So if you have something that everyone goes for as number one, you can mathematically just erase it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so we did. Um, One of the issues we have with with wartime economy is that if you look at, for example, Italy, which has around, let's say, 10 or 15 income, and the percentage-wise increase they get,
70%.
that's it's simply overpowering for that nation. So you can say that for Italy, it's a make or break tech. If they don't get it, they're gonna have a poor game probably, and then disregard the fact about the Italy being neutral and stuff, but and just focus on the tech itself. So there was there were some problems with that, and taking a few bucks out of the game. Um, I don't think hurts the game in any way. Um, we reduced the price a bit of some of the other stuff. So yeah, I'm sorry, Hambone. I'll buy you a beer. Come to Oklahoma in July, and I'll even give you a hug, and it's gonna be okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
I
I'm
think you'll.
thrilled.
Yeah, I think you'll. I think even Hambone will eventually come around and see that it's fun as Italy. Now I get to choose a tech instead of just going on autopilot.
Right. Well, it's interesting because both Hambone and I believe, played YouTube games where we didn't develop wartime economy till turn 15. I mean, it just shows you like how luck dependent it was. And then sometimes you'd roll snake eyes, sometimes you'd roll boxcars. So I really don't like it because it's introducing more luck into the game, and by eliminating it, then there's more choice in the game of what techs you might want to pick. So I'm really happy. I think it was great to get rid of that tech. So one final thing before we go over the individual techs, and that's to say thank you for organizing the techs by increasing difficulty. So I don't know if many people have noticed, but all the techs at the beginning are the 7 and higher techs, and then you have the 8 and higher techs, and then the last 3 techs are the 9 and higher. So you got 3 really tough techs to get that are 9 plus, 5 medium tough techs to get that are 8 plus, and then you've got 8 techs that are 7 plus. So I'm glad that for new players, they'll see, the easy ones are at the top, then the middle ones, and at the bottom are the more difficult ones. So Hambone did notice that because he's pretty much a big nerd. So enough teasing Hambone. Okay, so now we can dig down into the specific techs. There's 16 techs total, and 4 of the techs are completely unchanged from version 3. Those 4 are advanced mechanized infantry, advanced artillery, jet fighters, and heavy strategic bombers. Those are completely unchanged. So that leaves us 12 techs, and we're going to go over what changes occurred. So the first one that was changed was radar, and boy, was this one changed, because the biggest change to radar is that now it's not just allowing fighters to scramble from air bases, but it allows seaplanes to scramble from seaplane bases, and submarines to scramble from submarine bases, and naval units that are in port to scramble from major naval facilities. That was a huge change. Also, radar allows you to use your inherent anti-aircraft to shoot down strategic rockets, and that works slightly differently than your normal inherent anti-aircraft, which if a strategic bomber flies overhead, you get to do the damage to the facility, and then you see if your bomber is shot down. But with strategic rockets, if the anti-aircraft hits, then the strategic bomber or strategic rocket does no damage at all if you have radar. And then the last thing is that I really love is that heavy fleet carriers with fighters on board that also have developed radar can scramble those fighters. And so that's going to make heavy fleet carriers, I think, particularly valuable. And I'm really excited about that, especially for the United States or perhaps Japan. So talk us through that. That's a huge number of changes that you made to radar.
Uh, Perhaps to begin with, you mentioned about the scrambling. Um, if you don't have radar, you can scramble up to 3 units, and that for submarines, seaplanes, all that stuff. And with
Mm-hmm.
radar, it's unlimited scrambling.
Thank you.
So you can
Right.
still scramble from submarine bases and seaplane bases without radar, but you're limited to the number
Of
of
course. Right.
units. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but a radar is one of these techs which in the earlier versions were primarily used for convoy purposes. So if you were facing a lot of submarines, radar would be on your menu. If you were landlocked, radar were perhaps not so useful. Um, so one of the things we did, like you mentioned, was the strategic rockets, which we will come back to. Players will notice that there's a lot of text that goes toe to toe to one another.
Mm-hmm.
So if your opponent gets this, you would want to have this one. If you don't have this one, then you're kind of screwed.
Mm-hmm.
So we introduced these tick and toes mechanics so that if you start tracking what your opponent has, you will eventually well then I need to focus on this, and perhaps you would have to switch focus mid game because suddenly
Mm-hmm.
your enemy has rockets or other other things. Um, and a lot of the problem we had with rockets was we wanted to be useful but not too powerful. And the sweet spot for that, I think we nailed it here.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and one of the solutions to make it work is that, well, if you get rockets and I have radar and perhaps some of the other techs, I'm not totally screwed anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So it does give the players an ability to actually do something about rockets. And the last new thing was the heavy freight carriers. We will get back to those later on. Heavy ships in general are mostly for the Americans and Japan. And if you look at for the strategic objectives point of view, heavy battleships is perhaps the best buy because they're cheaper and they're heavy hitters. And you can say that heavy carriers, they can be somewhat vulnerable, and it takes a lot of planes to make them dangerous, so they're also expensive. And whenever we have a unit in the game that is perhaps underutilized, either get rid of it or try to make it work
Mm-hmm.
worth your while getting. So we introduced this ability with radar, so you can scramble from heavy carriers, which it makes for some interesting defensive play,
Mm-hmm.
and even for Europe, because you can park your carriers next to
Right.
France and then defend against German
I see. You scramble
counterattacks.
into Normandy. I
Yeah,
hadn't thought about that.
precisely.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So
Right.
that's one of the big issues with doing an amphibious assault is that you can't get your aircraft in on the
Mm-hmm.
same turn. So you're vulnerable if your opponent has 10 aircraft and some fodder. But if you can scramble from the carrier next door, then suddenly it opens up some possibilities here.
Mm-hmm.
So you can say that we expanded the scope for radar a bit. Um, so yeah, I think it's a good tech for several reasons.
Definitely. Yeah.
Um,
The next tech that was changed is your anti-submarine warfare tech. And this is, radar had a lot of changes. Anti-submarine warfare is essentially the same with just one little addition, which is to give seaplanes a +2 when attacking subs, as long as they're on map. Seaplanes on map attacking subs get a +2. I like that both from a gameplay standpoint and from a realism standpoint because seaplanes just got better and better and better throughout World War II and became much more effective at hunting down subs. So I really like seeing that there's a technology that represents that and gives you an easier time of mopping up the subs at the end rather than chasing them endlessly. They're running away from you and still being on a convoy route and raiding that turn, and you're just trying to get your seaplane or your medium bomber to chase them. I like the combination we'll talk about later about the increased range and then the increased damage. So, any comment about that one?
Anti-submarine warfare was perhaps one of the top one techs for Great Britain, for good reason. Um, so seaplanes got an overhaul, and this is part of that overhaul. It's also actually to piss the American player off, because the US player also has seaplanes, so he would like to have this tech as well. But in a normal game, he wouldn't
Piss him
give
off
a.
and,
I'm
and
sorry about
giving
it,
him more
but
tough choices. That's what you're
yeah,
saying.
in a normal game, he wouldn't give a shit about. Sorry, my
No, no
pardon my
problem. Yeah.
French,
Uh
about
huh.
this tech because he doesn't have much convoy lines to protect anyway.
Right.
But if he has some seaplanes now, he would, and it's a 7 tech.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it could be an option for the American player, and also for I mean Japan, they have some convoy lines, but they really want to have better seaplanes.
Mm.
So it's again we broadened up the scope for this. Um, yeah, so I think it's a good tech. It works well, and it makes the seaplane bet or the gamble
Mm-hmm.
more interesting because if suddenly you get a +2 and you have a bunch in stock,
Mm-hmm.
uh, suddenly the subs, yeah, it's gonna be
They're going to start
tough.
disappearing.
Yeah,
Just the fact that you said you did it to piss the American player off shows me that I have a paradigm shift ahead of me because I'm still, even though you said America developed all the techs, in my brain, America will have all the techs. But no, you're forcing America to make some tough choices, and that's look at you smile. Look how happy that makes you. The poor U.S. player is going to be pulled in many different directions because they aren't going to have all the techs. So, yeah, that's fascinating. All right, let's talk about improved factories. So, one thing for players to note in switching from V3 to V4 is that the shipyard production, the increased shipyard production, has been moved from improved construction in V3 to improved factories in V4. So now, if you get improved factories, that also improves the capacity of your shipyards to produce ships. Whereas before, improved construction was kind of a naval tech, had a naval focus. Now it's kind of spreading that out. And then there's a nation specific unit, which is the T-34 that the Soviets get. It's a medium armor that has a target selection against vehicles of 1, and its cost is reduced by 1. You can only build 2 of them, but that's definitely going to be something Russia's going to want to develop. And one thing I want to mention about that is I tip my hat to you about including the nation-specific units in the tech chart. In version 3, that wasn't done. I remember learning the technology and reading about the tech, and then playing Germany and realizing, oh, here in the national reference sheet it says if I've developed heavy armor, then I can build these Tiger 1Es. And it wasn't that wasn't in the rule book. You would have to find that in the national reference sheet. So I think it's a nice thing that the nation-specific units are listed there in the tech chart in the rule book when people are getting introduced to the game. I think that'll be good for people discovering how the game is played. So, any comments about improved factories?
and perhaps we should mention that 95% of all information on the reference sheets are actually in the rulebook in version 4, uh,
Mm-hmm.
because we don't want any good stuff being undiscovered because it's hidden somewhere. So almost everything is now in the rulebook. so that helps new players a lot. And back to the factories. So the improved factories, improved construction is a bit of well, what goes into which category. I think that combining all the production element in one makes sense. And the T-34s are actually they're one of the top units for the Russians to get. And we actually had this both. We have tried it in the improved factories and the improved construction. We've had it in both techs and tried which one would it fit most, or was the best fit. And the reason that it ended up in the improved factories is actually both because improved construction is the Russians would like to have improved construction to protect themselves against rockets, strategic bombing. So improved factories, a small subset of players, of Russian players, also went for improved factories, but most Russian players was perhaps not so focused on it. So we wanted to put the
You wanted to
T-34.
torment the Russian player just like you
Yes.
torment the U.S. player.
Yes,
I
precisely.
understand you now.
Yeah. So we wanted to let's put it in the category which are least likely to be on the wish list for Christmas.
I
and
feel
again,
like thematically it makes sense for it to be improved factories, like you're doing mass production. So I didn't even think about tormenting the player more because I'm a kind person who doesn't like to see people suffer. But obviously that's what makes you happy is giving really, really tough dilemmas to your customers. That's what you like to do.
Well, it's one of the few pleasures I have in life. So yeah.
That's awesome. Okay, let's talk about improved construction since you were bringing that up about the Soviets choosing to build that tech. They lost the shipyard bonus like we were talking about before, but importantly, they gained this damage reduction trait where minor factories resist 1 point of strategic bombing damage, medium factories resist 3 points, and then major factories resist 5 points of strategic bombing damage. Now that's in a one player's turn. So if you send 3 bombers, you take the total damage and subtract 5 if you're hitting it's not per bomber. But that is huge because if you look at the cost effectiveness of, say, just a regular strategic bomber going against a medium or a major factory, you get 2d6, so that's an average of 7, and you're going to face a 25% chance of losing your 12 IPP bomber. 25% of that is 3 IPP. So you're doing 7 points of damage. You're risking about 3 on average per turn. That's a 2.5 ratio cost effectiveness. That's fantastic. For every IPP I spend, you're going to lose 2.5. So when you add in the improved construction protection for a major factory, then it drops from 7 down to just 2 points of damage if you're attacking with 1 strategic bomber. And now you're doing 2 points of damage and risking 3 IPP to do it. So it's actually, you're paying IPP to do it. Now I think it's still probably worth it because you're preventing that major factory from rolling for tech. But that shows the sweet spot that you were talking about, where you set it up that if you don't roll for that tech, then your opponent is going to hurt you. And if you do roll for that tech, then you're going to kind of protect yourself from that. So well designed.
You can look at your opponent. If he's in the game for a lot of bombers, you want to have this tech. Otherwise, you're
screwed. You'll never get that tech.
No, you'll never get that tech. No, that's true.
Right.
And we in the previous games, it was mostly in the nations that had a naval race going on: Japan, US, perhaps UK. were interested in this tech, and most other nations ignored it. But now everyone that is
Mm-hmm.
vulnerable to strategic bombing has
Right.
this on the radar as well. Um, and the thing is, strategic bombers get introduced mid-game. So do you wait and see if your opponent buys them before you go for this tech? Because if you do, then you will have a lead time. Or do you go for it early because you know that Peter, he usually go for the bombers
Right.
and then sacrifice one tech slot. But if you then get it, your opponent will, well, I'm not going to bomb you. I'm just going to hurt you in other ways.
Right.
So it's a good tension, and it's a good ping pong for this,
Mm.
and it's a 7, so it's definitely doable.
Right.
So yeah,
One thing about the improved construction is that if someone captures your factory, they don't get the protection of that. So was that something that you stumbled up upon, that people would capture and they'd have to keep track of, is this factory improved construction or is this factory not improved construction? You just said forget keeping track of that. It's whether this nation has improved construction or not.
we usually go for the owner of.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have radar as an example, it is the owner of the airbase
Ah,
that does he have
right, the
radar.
owner. Mm-hmm.
Um, so again, here, if you capture something, you're now the owner.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have improved construction, you now have better
I
protection.
really like that. I didn't
Um,
catch that. That's
so
very
it's a
interesting.
way of, we just want to get things
Simple.
simple. Yeah,
The elegant solution that you were talking about before. I
yeah.
really think improved people are going to be surprised at how important improved construction is going to be, because at least I think strategic bombing is going to be, it's people have no clue what's coming. There's going to be bombers in the sky. V4 is going to be filled with bombers, and that means improved construction is going to be the next response. That's what I'm predicting is going to be coming for us. So okay, let's talk about the next really interesting tech, which is airborne doctrine. So now we get heavy air transports, and you point out specifically that the heavy air transport can bring two airborne infantry or elite airborne infantry, but can only, that's in combat movement for an airborne assault, but it can only bring one infantry, anti-aircraft artillery, or artillery unit in non-combat movement. Talk to me about that. Uh,
That
what did you
is
find?
that is due to what each unit represents in the game. So we have a one infantry sculpt, typically represent a division. Um, and if you were to bring two divisions, if you were to move those, that is a lot of planes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so you can argue that, well, we are bordering historical accuracy here, to make this worthwhile, or because but airborne infantry, they represent less men in the game, and that's why we then have the, you can transport two.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's a way of if players they really like airborne assaults, then this is an option for them to be really
Right.
dangerous. And
The
their
elite.
elites actually are a good unit,
Mm-hmm.
both in attack and defense. So yeah, it's definitely worthwhile.
Mm-hmm.
But the only problem is everything is worthwhile, or a lot of it
Right.
is worthwhile.
Right.
So
Mm-hmm.
the improved construction is also nice, but you can't attack with it, right? So what units do you want? And so it's a dilemma, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm.
HPG released some very nice sculpts for the heavy air transports,
Heavy air transport. Mm-hmm.
for the 3D people or the painters out there. So yeah, they can really get some nice sculpts.
Yeah, shout
Um,
out to HBG. Their 3D units they've been putting out are beautiful. You know, that's the future. I'm tempted to go back. I started getting some Soviet tanks. It's like I'm re I'm, I'm taking piece by piece and replacing my old Axis and Allies pieces with HBG 3D printed pieces. So I'm in trouble. Don't tell my wife because I told her it's over and I've spent what I'm going to spend. But it's always just a
Peter,
little bit more.
Peter, it's never over.
It's never
Yeah,
over.
yeah. I mean, 3D printing it really opens up the whole. I mean, it's for a game designer, it's like kids in a candy store.
Yeah.
And basically, if I need some weird sculpt, um, I give Doug a call and pester him about it, and sometime in the future, it's available on the website. So it's yeah, and they're actually I have quite a lot of interesting sculpts that he's working on. So yeah, more will be coming. But
Interesting.
yeah, it can get expensive. So
Yep.
perhaps bring your wife into the play group is the solution.
There you go. That's never going to happen. Okay, so let's talk about amphibious doctrine. Just organizationally, it seems like it goes first. We talked about land units, then air units, then naval units, then facilities, and then doctrines. So we're at the doctrines portion. The amphibious doctrine. So this is really the old attack transports technology. But we got rid of SNLF and the USMC. You can't get elite type Marines. So it seems like by getting rid of those units, you made the attack naval transports much more important, because those attack naval transports really increase your amphibious capabilities, which is exactly what you would expect in the amphibious doctrine. And one other thing is that you lowered the cost from the attack transport used to be 9 IPP, and the attack naval transport is only 7 IPP. So that is very tempting for USA, I imagine.
It was actually a very difficult tech to get right. And you're right, it's the old attack transport. So the old way of having tech giving you a new unit. That's how they do it in Axis and Allies. Um, I think I like our approach better, where you get a new unit and then some capabilities as well thrown in the mix. The difficulty with this one is that it's actually, or it was very difficult to balance Marines, elite Marines, normal transports, and then attack transports, because we don't want to have anything obsolete.
Right.
We want to have, so for example, let's say that we actually tested a lot of games with the SLNF and with the Marine Corps units. And we always ended up with, well, I don't need attack transports because I have these elite units. Okay, well, then you're not going to go for the doctrine tech. And then it's just a waste of paper in the rule book. Or it could be that I'm not going to buy any normal transport at all. I'm just going to go for the tech. And as soon as I have the tech, I'm going to buy the new attack transports. Well, that's all good and dandy, but I want you to buy normal transports as well. So they should also be useful after
Right.
you get the tech. And to get all this balanced and worked out, the two special units for the Japanese and the US, they had to go. So
Right.
they were just redundant in the game. And you can say that Marines with this tech from an amphibious, doing an amphibious assault from an attack transport, they are the SNLF or the
Right.
US Marine Corps. Um, so and we also tried a lot of, you need to have X amount of normal Marines to be able to buy the elite Marines, or some other variant of
Not elegant.
restriction. It was not elegant, and it was not fun. So yeah, so they had to go. And if people want to play with them, they can be introduced back in the next expansion or otherwise. So
Right.
yeah.
Okay,
So
the
in a way,
next.
it's
Oh.
you have the Airborne and the Amphibious. So they're open to players if they want to break the game open. So let's say that you have a very heavily fortified Gibraltar. Well, if you get Amphibious Doctrine and you can bring your medium armor in um,
Oh, wow.
on
You're
the
right.
first, and you don't suffer double casualties and all that stuff, you suddenly are unable to really break down these heavily fortified positions. Because otherwise, the late game, um, it could get the game could get stale because these,
The
if you don't have
positions are
tech to
entrenched.
do,
It's basically
yes,
World War One.
yeah,
Both forces are heavily fortified.
yeah.
That's really interesting. I hadn't thought about the medium armor rolling off the uh, attack transports. So that's really cool. All right, next tech is heavy armor. So the only thing that's different here is that the cost of heavy armor went from 8 down to 7. That's one of those really subtle things that might not seem to be big, but that could be the difference. You know, the 12% reduction in cost might be the difference, and now people are going out and getting themselves some heavy armor. What did you see in playtesting?
Well, on paper, everyone loves heavy tanks, right? Big is beautiful. The only problem was that it didn't make sense from a business perspective to go for the tech, because medium armor was simply better. They were cheaper. Of course, they were not as good, but they were 2 IPP cheaper. So I didn't see any good players at all going for this technology. It was simply a waste of time. So once you played the game a couple of times and you got your Tigers and your heavy armor and you got that out of the system, then you parked the tech on the shelf and then went for the other ones.
Right.
So, but after we reduced it to 7, suddenly people went after it again. So it's actually quite simple. If you play 20 games and you look at, well, what is not being done at all, there's a problem here. Now you have a yellow or red.
Red box that we're going to turn green.
Yeah.
Yep.
So either get rid of it or make it work. And I'm lucky to have some very good players in the playtest groups. And oftentimes we argue back and forth for hours because no, I'm not going to buy it. I want you to buy it. No, it's not worthwhile. And then it's ugly. But
I see. I think I understand you, Morten. You wanted to torment the German player here. That's why you made heavy armor one cheaper, so that you could torment the German player, give them another tough choice to make.
German and also the Soviet player.
Oh
I mean,
yeah.
heavy armor is a battleship on tracks, right?
Right.
So it is a good unit. So
It's got that target selection too,
yeah,
especially
yeah.
yeah,
And
especially
if
the
you have heavy
Tigers.
armor, you're actually more or less. Perhaps you don't need to buy um, the.
T-34.
Well, they're very cheap.
Yeah.
But I was
Tank
actually thinking
destroyers.
I was actually thinking
What?
about tank destroyers because you now you have the target selection capability.
Right.
So, but if you don't have heavy armor, perhaps you need the tank destroyers, depending on what your opponent has. So
I mean, I think you kind of turned 2 boxes green here. By getting more heavy armor in the game, I guarantee you're going to get more tank destroyers in the game because Someone starts buying heavy armor, the other guy's going to start buying tank destroyers. Which is exactly what happened.
Yeah,
Tank heavy armor started showing up, and then we needed the other side needed tank destroyers to take them out. So cool when the game follows life, follows history. So, okay, the next tech that's pretty much the same, just a slight change, is long range aircraft. Long range aircraft gives a +1 range, map range to seaplanes that are leaving from a seaplane base. Again, that's one of those teeny tiny little changes that turns 2 yellow boxes green, because you get more benefit and action out of a seaplane. And you also probably saw some seaplane bases starting to get built, because I don't think I ever saw a seaplane base get built. But now there is incentive. I think long range aircraft was already a great tech, but now it's going to make people think about buying seaplane bases. Is that what you saw happen?
yeah, and it was almost too good of a tech, so that's why we also raised it from 7 to 8.
Oh, I didn't catch that. Ah,
So it used to
okay.
be 7,
Right. It
but
used to
as
be
I
7
said,
and now it's an 8. Right.
um, and we tried a lot of different variations here about, well, do we upgrade only the new planes, or do we get all planes upgraded? Um, yeah, let's just say that if some of the stuff we tried out didn't work. So
Right. Too much record keeping, and it gets persnickety.
actually, it was when we introduced it, it sounded good on paper, right? It makes sense from a realistic perspective, but no one ever went after long range aircraft, because once you got it in the game, it was too late to buy new planes anyway. So
Right.
you already had
I see.
the
Right.
the
You already
number of
had your Air Force on
aircraft.
the
Yeah.
map. Yeah.
So
Totally.
and it just shows that playtesting is
King.
just necessary, because there are a lot of good ideas on paper that sucks in real life.
Right.
Yeah.
Scientific
So
method. Yeah,
yeah.
that's right. Okay, the next tech is advanced submarines. So I really like the Wolfpack rule that you have in version 4, where if you have 2 or more subs, you get a +1 if they're in the same sea zone. I believe in Canada at war, I'm not an expert at Canada at war, but I believe you have to have the subs on the same convoy line to get the plus. But now the submarines actually are working together, which feels right for a Wolfpack, that the submarines would be in the same sea zone convoy raiding together. Any comments about that?
Wolf packs. The It was a big part of the naval battle for the battle for the Atlantic. So we wanted it in the game, and by going where they are in the same sea zone, we make them work together, which were historical. But it's also very simple. So how do you get something in the game as simple as possible? And the thing here and perhaps that's also worth noting, is that it gives all your submarines +1 if together.
So
So
you roll, if let's say you have 3 submarines, you roll 1 pair of dice, you get the extra roll, the extra 1 for that one, then the second pair extra roll for that one, or extra
yeah,
1 for
I'm
that one.
thinking it's more like, well, you don't need advanced submarines to get a Wolfpack bonus. So if we introduced it where it was only advanced submarines who got the bonus, then it was more or
I
less irrelevant.
Right.
So now, for example, Germany, they don't have to wait and buy advanced submarines. They can still get a bonus from the original submarines, which is what we want. So,
I
so
didn't think
that's
about
also
that.
here.
It's a little bit like the long range aircraft, where your subs that are already on the board automatically benefit that
Yeah,
turn.
yeah,
And in a way, it's a doctrine as well, because you've kind of learned how to operate the subs in a new way. So that's really cool. I hadn't picked up on that. You read the rules, but you don't see as deeply. So that was really
I think
interesting.
you need to. I think you need to play a lot of games to really get into the nitty gritty details of how things work. Yeah.
Okay, so the next one I think is the biggest change to tech after the removal of wartime economy, and that is large ship construction. This is a mashup of heavy carriers and heavy battleships. You merge them into one tech, and this is going to be, now we're going to see heavy fleet carriers, because in my experience, you wouldn't see heavy carriers in most games. People wouldn't. Maybe the U.S. would develop it at the very end, but now with the combination of radar giving them the ability to scramble fighters, and you're definitely going. I think Japan and USA are really likely to go for large ship construction, so and engage in that capital ship race. So this tech is really buffed, I think. Any comments about that one?
It was actually we discussed it a lot actually if we wanted these large ships in the game or not. I mean, in V3, like you said, they were mostly never used. You could have an American player, and if he painted some sculpts to represent the heavy ships, he might go for it just to brag for
Right.
his nice pieces. But most other players they totally ignored these. So so combining the two into one, that sweetened the deal. But I
But
think
then you had to
the
raise the cost. You had to make it more difficult than a 7, to research.
yeah. We raised it to a 7. I think also the prices
No,
of the
it
units.
was a 7. I think you raised it. Is it a 9 now,
No,
or
it's an 8. It's an 8.
oh, it's an 8. Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I knew you raised it.
So I think we also reduced the unit price a bit. I think, but the main thing here is the strategic objectives for the Japanese and US. So for those nations, they're very useful. And we already talked about the scrambling from heavy carriers, and that's to make the heavy carrier worthwhile getting. Um, yeah, and now you can, I mean, now everyone can bring out their big sculpts
Right.
for the heavy ships.
Right.
And of course,
I do have
Russia is
sculpts for
probably
that.
not gonna go for this one, and that's okay. We do have some text in the game that is pro certain nations, and that's
Right.
fine. We don't want to twist the whole system to make it worthwhile for everyone anyway. So
Definitely not.
there are some niche texts, and they serve a purpose, and this is one of them.
Right. Okay, strategic rockets. This was a completely broken tech that you have fixed. So before, in version 3, strategic rockets did 1d6 damage, but you had to pay 6 IPP. So you pay 6 to do 3.5 on average. And now a strategic rocket costs you 3 IPP to do 3.5. So it's cost effective, and if your opponent doesn't have radar, it cannot be stopped. So you get the 3.5 points of damage. On the other hand, there is a defense against the strategic rockets, the development of radar. So I think that's been a great fix. I still think even if your opponent does have radar, it's probably worth 3 just to take out their tech for the turn, or have a 75% chance of hitting a major factory and taking their tech out. But what are your thoughts, or what's been your experience with that?
I think strategic rockets is probably the tech that I've been had most sleepless nights over. It has been very difficult to get right, and I've had a lot of games where we didn't play with at all, so we simply removed it. But it's one of these things that they belong in a World War II game. They didn't. It wasn't. They didn't have a huge impact on the war, but they belong in the game. So we want them, but we don't want them to be game breaking. And then you have all the issues with, well, are they worthwhile getting? So they are tied to some strategic objectives for two nations. We lowered the price, but the big thing is the retreating bombing change. So now you can actually remove a tech from your opponent, and then let's say that he has improved construction or improved factories. You're actually still able to do to really piss him off, because if he keeps his ships in port, you can damage the port.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So they don't benefit from the reduced damage. So and so all these, I mean, the import rules actually, they open up, and there's a lot of areas in the game where where the different rules are tied into this mechanic, and people will only notice this when they start playing.
I mean, the thing about allowing advanced tech units to be built outside of home country makes strategic rockets more viable for Germany, because you could build one in Romania, you could build one in Warsaw, and hit targets that might be really opportune, and not have to waste one extra turn, transporting that strategic rocket to the location. You build it, and the next turn you probably hit your target. So I
Or
think
you can
that's going to be
build one
interesting.
in Norway or Spain as the US if you build factories there. So yeah,
Oh man,
it's a way of
that's
getting
awesome.
IPP velocity again, getting your IPP to do damage as fast as possible.
Right, right. Interesting. Okay, the last technology that's been changed, or that's been added, is improved logistics, a completely new technology. This is an extremely powerful tech. You get to double your strategic rail movement, you get +1 strategic naval movement. The thing that is really interesting to me for both Germany and Russia is the ability to go across rail gauges. That seems like a game changer to me. I know it's 9 plus to develop, but boy, that seems like a really tasty tech. What's been the impact on the game with that?
It's a very powerful tech, and it's definitely it should be on the German players' menu, or at least consider it. But it is a 9, so it is a gamble. But it's definitely worthwhile getting, for several nations. So it works really well, and it also actually solves the issue with the going up across the railroad gouges. The
Right.
mechanics for that. Did you stop in the first land zones after the switch? It was confusing and not very elegant in version 3. So now you can't go across unless you have this tech. So yeah, it works well.
Yeah, you're pointing out that now you end on the same gauge that you started on.
Yeah,
You don't go into the next one and stop. That is a big change, and people are going to find that this tech is really very helpful to get key units right where you need them. So could be a difference maker there. So basically, overall, it seems like you looked at lots of techs that needed a little buff up, maybe a tech that was a little too good, like long range aircraft. You shaved it down a little bit by going from a 7 up to an 8 in difficulty, and you got rid of wartime economy so that there's more choices. There's not a really standout tech, that everyone has to get. And then on top of that, you also took away how many tech rolls we're going to have, in that America can't roll for tech till it hits 10 IPP income, and Russia can't roll for tech until it's at 15. IPP income, and people are losing income from strategic rockets and bombers. So you've really just tormented everyone. Mission accomplished. You made everyone miserable because they're going to have so many choices of great techs and so few tech roles to make. I'm really excited. I think the tech system is going to be phenomenal in version 4. Anything that you want to add?
I think the American IPP limit for tech is 10. So coincidentally, that's when Japan goes into China, the US go above 10.
Ah,
So
right.
so it actually it's the Japanese player will now have to, as soon as he goes anywhere, the Americans will start rolling for tech.
Mm-hmm.
So another dilemma to put on the Japanese plate.
Right.
Do you go in one turn early? Perhaps, but then the US will start rolling for tech this turn.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it works very well. And when we looked at all the playtests we've done and seen, well, now the game is over. How much tech do we have? I really like the amount that each nation has. Of course, the dice has some impact, but if we average it out, I think it works well, and it also motivates to buy more major factories because you
Mm-hmm.
don't get so many roles. I mean, we also removed the German free tech role.
Oh,
That's also
right.
gone. Um, so you could even have a very tech hungry German player going for 5 major
Mm-hmm.
factories. So yeah, it's I was very proud of the way we did tech in V3 coming from V2. I think that was a huge improvement,
Mm-hmm.
and I think players will immediately notice the same um,
Improvement.
yeah, and the same improvement going from V3 to V4.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, there's a lot of opinions of how to do tech. I mean, some people they want to have less luck involved. So some want to have all the dice counted up, and then when you hit 50 or 40 or whatever, you get a breakthrough. To me, that's just too much counting. I think what we have here with 4 stages and a lot of good deals at the end. I think that works very well.
I agree. I agree. Well, I think that concludes our exploration of technology. A board gaming bro is probably going to do the next one of these interviews with you. I was just wondering, Morten, if you had ever seen a board gaming bro's like vocal warm ups that he does before every interview. It's quite bizarre.
The bishop wore buttless chaps to the bat mitzvah. Bat mitzvah. Oh! Oh no! Oh no! They're coming in through the back door! Oh no! Oh no! Grab the children! Save the children!
No, I'm no judgment. Whatever makes you comfortable, board gaming bro. But thank you so much for the discussion again today, Morten. It's always a pleasure.
The place is all mine, Peter. Thank you.